She's nothing, Your Honor. Just a housewife who spent my money while I built an empire." Those were the words that echoed through the Manhattan High Court. Maris Sterling, the city's youngest tech billionaire, stood in his $3,000 suit laughing as he stripped his wife of everything. He thought he had won. He thought Nina was just a quiet, broken woman who would fade into the shadows. He was wrong. He didn't know that the money he was fighting for wasn't actually his. He didn't know that the woman sitting silently at the defendant's table wasn't just a housewife. She was the hidden titan who owned the very ground he stood on. And by the time the gavel banged for the last time, Maris Sterling wouldn't just be divorced, he would be destroyed. The rain battered the tall Gothic windows of the New York Supreme Court at 60 Center Street, but the storm inside courtroom 302 was far more violent. Nina Sterling sat alone at the mahogany defense table. She wore a simple charcoal gray dress that she had owned for 5 years. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her face pale and unreadable. Across the aisle, the atmosphere was like a cocktail party. Maris Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Dynamics, leaned back in his leather chair, checking his Rolex Submariner. He whispered something to his lawyer, a sharp-featured woman named Jessica Thorne, and they both stifled a laugh. Jessica wasn't just his lawyer. The tabloids had already confirmed she was the reason for this divorce. She was younger, louder, and hungry for the spotlight Nina had always shunned. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Harrison said, peering over his spectacles, "let us proceed. Your counsel claims that Mrs. Sterling is entitled to zero equity in Sterling Dynamics." Jessica Thorne stood up, smoothing her crimson blazer. She didn't look at the judge. She looked directly at the cameras at the back of the room. This was a high-profile case, and she was performing. "Correct, Your Honor," Jessica said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We have provided the financial forensics. For 7 years, while Mr. Sterling worked 18-hour days to build Sterling Dynamics into a Fortune 500 company, Nina Sterling contributed absolutely nothing. She held no job. She brought in no income. She merely existed in the luxury my client provided." A ripple of murmurs went through the gallery. "Humiliation," Nina thought, keeping her eyes fixed on the court seal above the judge's head. "They aren't satisfied with leaving me. They want to humiliate me." "Mrs. Sterling," the judge addressed her, "you have refused legal counsel. Do you have a response to these claims?" Nina stood up slowly. She didn't have the shark-like energy of Jessica or the arrogance of Maris. She looked tired. "I supported my husband, Your Honor. I managed our home. I advised him on—" "Objection," Jessica cut in, rolling her eyes. "Advising on tie colors is not corporate consulting, Your Honor. My client is a visionary. He built the Ether software from scratch in a garage. Mrs. Sterling's name is not on a single patent, not on a single loan document. She is a passenger who thinks she owns the train." Maris chuckled audibly. "She's right, Nina. Let's be real. You don't even know how to open a PDF, let alone run a company. Take the settlement." The settlement offer was on the screen, a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens and a monthly stipend of $2,000 for 3 years. For a man worth $4.2 billion, it was an insult. It was a crumb thrown to a beggar. "I am offering this out of pity," Maris said, his voice carrying to the back of the room. "I want her to survive. But I will not have a leech draining the company I built with my own blood and sweat." Nina looked at Maris, really looked at him. She remembered the nights 7 years ago when he was crying on the floor of their studio apartment because the banks rejected his loan. She remembered who made the phone call that got him the money. She remembered who whispered the code structure for the ether prototype while he slept. But she had promised her father she would never use the Vance name unless it was a matter of life and death. "Is this what you want, Maris?" Nina asked softly. The room went quiet. "To leave me with nothing, to erase me from your history." "I'm just correcting a mistake, Nina." Maris sneered, adjusting his silk tie. "We were incompatible. I need a partner who understands power. You're just a housewife. You're boring. And quite frankly, you're expensive dead weight." Jessica Thorne smirked, sliding a document across the table. "Sign the papers, Nina, unless you want us to release the deposition about your mental instability regarding your family history." It was a threat. They were going to frame her as crazy if she fought back. Nina looked at the papers. The divorce decree, the non-disclosure agreement, the forfeiture of all assets. She picked up the cheap plastic pen provided by the court. "Very well," Nina said, her voice steady. "If you want me gone, Maris, I will be gone." The scratching of the pen against the paper sounded like a scream in the silent courtroom. Nina Vance Sterling. She signed it. She signed away the penthouses, the Hamptons estate, the private jets, and the 50% share of the company she was legally entitled to under New York law. She waived it all. Judge Harrison looked surprised. "Mrs. Sterling, are you sure you are walking away from potentially billions? I can order a recess." "No, Your Honor," Nina said, closing the folder. She looked at Maris, her eyes suddenly cold, devoid of the sadness that was there moments ago. "My husband has made it very clear that he built this empire alone. He claims he needs no one. I want to give him exactly what he wishes for. Total independence." Maris pumped his fist in the air, hugging Jessica. "Done finally. Order." The judge banged the gavel. "The divorce is granted. The assets are divided per the agreement. Court is adjourned." As the room cleared, Maris and Jessica blocked Nina's path to the exit. "Don't feel too bad, sweetie," Jessica said, leaning in, smelling of expensive Chanel perfume. "The apartment in Queens has a view of a brick wall. It suits you." Maris laughed, pulling out his phone. "I'm throwing a freedom party tonight at the plaza. The board of directors, the investors, everyone will be there. We're announcing the merger with Omnicorp tomorrow. It's going to make me the richest man in the tri-state area." He looked at Nina with pity. "I'd invite you, but staff only." Nina adjusted her coat. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She reached into her purse and pulled out a simple black card. It wasn't a credit card. It was a thick, matte metal business card with a gold-embossed emblem of a lion. The seal of the Vanguard Group, the most exclusive private equity firm in Zurich. She didn't hand it to him. She just held it for a second, then slipped it back. "Enjoy the party, Maris," Nina said. "And make sure you read the fine print on the Omnicorp merger." "I wrote the merger, you idiot," Maris spat. "Get out of my face." Nina walked out of the heavy oak doors and into the rain. She didn't hail a taxi. Instead, a black Rolls-Royce Phantom, which had been idling illegally in the judges-only lane, pulled up to the curb. The driver, a massive man named Silas, with a scar running down his cheek, stepped out with an umbrella. He ignored the confused onlookers and opened the rear door for Nina. "Mrs. Vance," Silas said, his voice deep and respectful. He used her maiden name. "The board is waiting for your call in Zurich." "Did he sign?" Nina slid into the heated leather seat, wiping a single drop of rain from her cheek. She watched through the tinted glass as Maris and Jessica high-fived on the courthouse steps, posing for the paparazzi. "He signed Silas," Nina said, pulling out a secure satellite phone from the armrest. "He thinks he's free." "And the asset transfer?" Silas asked, putting the car into gear. Nina dialed a number that bypassed the US switchboards connecting directly to a private server in Switzerland. "Initiate Protocol 0, Nina said into the phone. Maris Sterling just claimed full legal responsibility for Sterling Dynamics. He claimed he built it alone, which means the safety net is gone." "Understood, Madame Chairwoman," a crisp British voice answered on the other end. "Shall we recall the loans?" Nina looked back at the courthouse fading in the rain. "Recall everything. The capital, the patents, the server leases, all of it. He wanted to be a self-made man. Let's see what he's made of." The grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was bathed in golden light. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a shimmering glow over New York's elite. The air smelled of expensive cologne, truffle oil, and victory. Maris Sterling stood at the center of the room, a glass of 1959 Dom Perignon in his hand. He was beaming. Beside him, Jessica Thorne wore a red silk gown that hugged her figure, a diamond necklace specifically rented for the evening sparkling at her throat. "To Maris!" shouted a man near the front, David Groden, the CFO of Sterling Dynamics. He was a sweaty, nervous man, but tonight even he looked relaxed. "To the man who turned a garage startup into a $4 billion unicorn." "Hear, hear!" the crowd roared. Maris raised his glass, basking in the adoration. He spotted Arthur Kensington, the CEO of Kensington Global, formerly Omnicorp, standing near the buffet. Kensington was the key. Tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m., the merger would be signed, and Maris's net worth would triple. He would be untouchable. Maris walked over, shaking hands with senators and tech moguls. He felt lighter without Nina. She had been a ghost in his house, a constant reminder of his struggling days. Jessica was different. Jessica was a trophy. She matched his brand. "Arthur." Maris greeted the older man with a firm handshake. "Ready for tomorrow. The lawyers have the papers drafted." Arthur Kensington, a man with white hair and eyes like polished steel, smiled politely, but didn't drink. "It's a big day, Maris, although I heard the divorce was finalized only hours ago. That was fast." "Cut the dead weight," Maris said with a wink. Nina was a sweet girl, but she didn't understand this world. She was holding me back. Liability management, right? Liability management. Arthur repeated his expression unreadable. "You know, Maris, my due diligence team mentioned something odd last week. They said a significant portion of Sterling Dynamics' core infrastructure, the server farms, the cloud architecture, even the patent for the Ether algorithm, is listed under a third-party holding company, Vance Holdings. You never mentioned them." Maris waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, that's just tax structuring. Old paperwork from when I first started. I set up some shell companies to protect the IP. It's all under my control. I am Vance Holdings." He lied effortlessly. The truth was, he didn't remember setting up Vance Holdings. He assumed his old lawyers did it. He had signed so many papers in the early days, usually with Nina, placing them in front of him with coffee, saying, "Sign this, it's for the server lease." He never read them. He was the visionary. He didn't do paperwork. "As long as you own it," Arthur said, taking a sip of water. "Because if you don't, we're buying an empty shell." "I own everything, Arthur." Maris laughed, clapping him on the back. "Relax. Tonight is about celebration." At that moment, the music, a live string quartet playing Vivaldi, suddenly stopped. It wasn't a planned stop. It was a jarring, discordant halt. A murmur went through the crowd. Maris frowned and looked toward the stage. David Grodin, the CFO, was rushing toward Maris. His face, usually flushed with alcohol, was now ghost white. He was holding his phone so tight his knuckles were yellow. "Maris," David hissed, grabbing his arm. "We have a problem." "Not now, David. I'm talking to Arthur." "Maris, you need to look at your phone. Now." Maris rolled his eyes and pulled his slim smartphone from his tuxedo pocket. He had Fifamove missed calls, all from the head of IT, and one notification from his bank. Alert. Corporate credit line, ending in T90, has been suspended. Reason, collateral withdrawal. "What is this?" Maris scowled. "Did you forget to pay the Amex bill, David? It's not the credit card, Maris," David whispered, his voice trembling so hard. The ice in his glass rattled. "It's the servers, the Ether platform. It's gone." "What do you mean, gone? Like down for maintenance?" "No. Deleted, encrypted, locked out." David swallowed hard. "We just got a digital notice on every terminal in the headquarters. It says license expired. Maris, the entire global system just shut down. Our clients, hospitals, banks, the traffic grid, they're all offline." Maris felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his spine. "That's impossible. We own the code." "Do we?" David looked at him with terrified eyes. "I just checked the registry. The IP for Ether isn't owned by Sterling Dynamics. It's leased from Vance Holdings." The name hit Maris like a physical slap. Vance. He looked at Jessica, who was busy taking selfies with a champagne tower, oblivious to the fact that her meal ticket was currently burning to the ground. Then the double doors of the ballroom swung open. It wasn't the police. It wasn't the press. It was a line of 6 men in dark grey suits. They didn't look like lawyers. They looked like executioners. Leading them was a tall man with silver hair and a British accent, the same voice that had spoken to Nina on the phone. The music had stopped, so the sound of their dress shoes clicking on the marble floor echoed through the silent room. They walked straight toward Maris. "Maris Sterling?" the silver-haired man asked. He held a leather portfolio. "Who the hell are you?" Maris demanded, trying to regain his composure. "This is a private party. Security." "My name is Julian Thorne, no relation to your mistress," the man said, dryly glancing at Jessica. "I am the chief legal officer for the Vanguard Group based in Zurich. I am here representing the interests of our primary shareholder, Vance Holdings." "Vance?" Maris stammered. "My ex-wife, Nina." "Ms. Vance is not just your ex-wife, Mr. Sterling," Julian said, his voice projecting to the entire room. "She is the sole proprietor of the intellectual property you have been using for 7 years. The code, the patents, the server farms. She owns them. You were merely a tenant." The room gasped. Arthur Kensington took a step back, his eyes narrowing. "That's a lie," Jessica shrieked, storming over. "Maris built this company. Nina just sat at home baking cookies." Julian opened the portfolio and pulled out a document. It was aged yellowing paper. 7 years ago, Mr. Sterling, you were denied every bank loan in the city. You were bankrupt. Then miraculously, a Swiss trust funded your startup. You signed a usage agreement. This document states that in the event of a divorce where Miss Vance is found to be at fault. The assets transfer to you. But Julian paused for dramatic effect. In the event of a no-fault divorce, or if you initiate the separation, claiming full independence, the lease terminates immediately, and all loans are called due, in full. Julian handed the paper to Maris. You signed this, Mr. Sterling, right here, next to the clause that defines ingratitude. Maris stared at the signature. It was his. The loop of the M, the sharp slash of the S. He remembered the night. He was drunk on cheap wine, celebrating the funding. Nina had handed him the paper. It's just standard protection, Maris. Just sign it so we can start. He had signed away his own company before it even began. This is a trick, Maris whispered. She can't do this. I have investors. I have billions. You had a valuation, Julian corrected. But a tech company with no technology is worth nothing. And as of 10 minutes ago, Vanguard Group has exercised its right to seize collateral for the unpaid startup loans plus interest. We are freezing the corporate accounts. Phones all over the room began to light up. The investors in the room, men who had poured millions into Sterling Dynamics, were getting alerts. Stock alert. Sterling Dynamics. SDYN halted. Pending regulate. Investigation. My money, someone shouted from the back. Get on the phone. Sell. Panic broke out. It wasn't a riot. It was a rich person's panic. Frantic, whispering people rushing to the exits to call their brokers, glares of pure hatred directed at Maris. Arthur Kensington stepped forward. The polite business face was gone. He looked like a shark smelling blood. Maris, Arthur said, his voice low and dangerous. Is this true? Does she own the IP? Arthur. Listen, it's a misunderstanding. I can fix it. I just need to talk to her. Maris reached for Arthur's arm. Arthur recoiled. The deal is off, and my legal team will be suing you for fraud. You presented assets you didn't own. Arthur turned to his entourage. Let's go. I don't want to be associated with a corpse. Arthur. Wait, Maris screamed, but the CEO was already walking away. Jessica Thorne was staring at her phone. Her face was pale. Maris, my credit card just got declined at the bar. Shut up, Jessica! Maris roared. He turned to Julian, grabbing the lawyer by the lapels. Where is she? Where is Nina? Ms. Vance is currently en route to the airport, Julian said calmly, removing Maris's hands from his suit. She has a board meeting in Zurich. She advised me to tell you that she hopes you enjoy your total independence. After all, you built this alone, didn't you? Maris let out a strangled sound of rage. He looked around the room. The party was disintegrating. The waiters were stopping service. The investors were leaving. He was standing in the wreckage of his life, and it had taken less than 15 minutes. I need to see her, Maris breathed. I can fix this. She loves me. She's just acting out. He ran. Maris Sterling, the billionaire genius, sprinted out of the ballroom, ignoring the shouts of his CFO and the flashes of the paparazzi, who were now realizing that the story wasn't the merger, it was the meltdown. He burst out of the Plaza Hotel and onto Fifth Avenue. The rain was pouring down in sheets, soaking his $3,000 suit instantly. He saw the taillights of the Rolls-Royce Phantom, just pulling away from the curb down the block. Nina! He screamed, running into the street. Nina, stop! He chased the car for a block, his lungs burning the rain, blinding him. But the Phantom didn't slow down. It glided effortlessly through the traffic, a massive dark shark in the water moving toward a future that Maris was no longer a part of. He stopped, gasping for air, hunched over with his hands on his knees. A puddle of dirty street water splashed onto his expensive shoes as a taxi sped by. His phone buzzed. A text message. It was from Nina. "You wanted a divorce because I was just a housewife. You were right. I'm not a housewife. I'm the landlord, and your rent is overdue." Maris stared at the screen, the water blurring the text. "Taxi!" he screamed, waving his hand frantically. "Follow that car. I'll give you $1,000. A yellow cab screeched to a halt. Maris dove in. "JFK Airport," Maris barked. "Private hangars. Go." "You got the cash, buddy?" the driver asked, eyeing Maris's soaked, manic appearance. Maris reached for his wallet. He pulled out his titanium black card, the ultimate symbol of wealth. "Just drive." He didn't know yet that the card was already a piece of plastic scrap. He didn't know that the locks on his penthouse had already been changed remotely. He was chasing a ghost, and he was running straight into a wall. The taxi tires screeched on the wet tarmac of the private terminal at Teterboro Airport. The security gate had been left momentarily open for a fuel truck, and Maris had bullied the cab driver into speeding through. Ahead, bathed in harsh white floodlights, sat a Gulfstream G650ER, a $65 million machine capable of flying halfway around the world without stopping. Its engines were already whining a high-pitched scream that cut through the drumming rain. Maris threw a wad of sodden cash at the driver and stumbled out of the cab. The wind whipped his drenched tuxedo jacket around him. He looked nothing like the master of the universe who had stood in the courtroom that morning. He looked like a desperate, drowning man. A figure stood at the bottom of the jet's air stairs. It was Silas, the massive bodyguard holding a large black umbrella. He saw Maris running toward them and stepped forward, blocking the path like a granite wall. "That's far enough, Mr. Sterling," Silas shouted over the roar of the engines. "Get out of my way!" Maris yelled, gasping for air. "She's my wife. I need to talk to my wife. Ex-wife." A cool voice corrected from above. Maris looked up. Nina stood at the top of the stairs, protected from the rain by the plane's overhang. She had changed out of her drab court dress. She was now wearing a tailored, cream-colored power suit that probably cost more than Maris's car. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun, was loose, blowing slightly in the wind. She looked regal, unreachable. "Nina," Maris pleaded, walking toward the stairs until Silas put a heavy hand on his chest. "Nina, baby, listen to me. This has gone too far. The joke is over. Turn the servers back on." Nina looked down at him, not with anger, but with the mild curiosity of a scientist examining an interesting insect. "There is no joke, Maris, and the servers aren't off. They've just been redirected to Vanguard's secure facility in Geneva." "But why? Why are you doing this to me?" Maris cried, rain dripping off his nose. "We were partners. I built that company for us." Nina laughed. It was a chilling sound, devoid of warmth. She slowly walked down 3 steps, just close enough so he could see her eyes. "You built nothing, Maris," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Do you want to know the truth? The real truth?" He nodded desperately. 7 years ago, my father, Lord Evelyn Vance, gave me a challenge. He didn't believe a woman could run the family empire. He told me to go to America, find a project, and build it into a billion-dollar entity without ever using the family name publicly. I had to be the silent partner, the shadow. Maris stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. Lord Vance, the British shipping magnate. "He passed away 2 days ago," Nina said, a flicker of genuine sadness crossing her face. "Which is why I am flying to Zurich tonight, to take my seat as the chairwoman of the board. I passed his test, Maris. I turned a mediocre, loud-mouthed programmer with a gambling debt into the cover model for Wired magazine. Mediocre. Maris bristled, his ego flaring up even in his desperation. I wrote the ether code. I am a visionary. Nina shook her head slowly. Do you remember those nights you were too stressed to work, when you passed out on the couch at 3 a.m.? Who do you think finished the code, Maris? Who debugged the core algorithm? Who structured the database architecture so it wouldn't collapse under load? Maris felt sick. He remembered waking up those mornings finding the work done and assuming he had done it in a caffeine-fueled fugue state. You, he whispered. Me. Nina confirmed. I learned C++ when I was 12. I have 2 master's degrees from MIT that I never told you about because you never asked. You were so busy explaining the world to me you never realized I was the one building it for you. The realization hit Maris harder than the bankruptcy. He hadn't just lost his money. He had lost his identity. He wasn't the genius. He was the puppet. Nina, please, Maris begged, dropping to his knees on the wet tarmac, ruining his suit trousers completely. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry I embarrassed you in court. I'm sorry about Jessica. Take me back. We can rule this together. You and me, the power couple. Just don't leave me here with nothing. Nina looked at the pathetic figure kneeling in the rain. For 7 years, she had loved him. She had supported him, and he had repaid her by treating her like an accessory he could discard when a shinier one came along. You don't want me, Maris, Nina said quietly. You want the access code, and that's the one thing you will never have again. She turned around and walked back up the stairs. Nina! No! He screamed. She stopped at the cabin door and looked back one last time. Oh, I almost forgot. The Queen's apartment you so generously gifted me in the settlement, I had my lawyers transfer the deed back to you an hour ago. You're going to need a place to live after the bank forecloses on the penthouse tomorrow. She stepped inside, and the heavy jet door sealed shut with a mechanical hiss, locking out the rain, the noise, and Maris Sterling. Silas retreated up the stairs, giving Maris one last pitying look before the stairs retracted. Maris remained kneeling as the massive jet engines roared to full power, blasting him with hot air and jet fuel fumes. He watched as the plane taxied away, gathered speed and lifted into the dark, stormy sky, carrying the real billionaire away, and leaving the fake one behind in the mud. 72 hours can change the world. For Maris Sterling, 72 hours was enough time for his entire existence to be erased. The fallout was swift, brutal, and highly public. The morning after the Freedom Party, the story wasn't about the Omnicorp merger. The headline on the Wall Street Journal read, "The Empty Empire. Sterling Dynamics exposed as fraud," because Nina had withdrawn the IP rights. Sterling Dynamics was technically selling a product it didn't own. The lawsuits began before noon. Arthur Kensington led the charge, suing Maris personally for corporate misrepresentation and fraud for $500 million. Maris sat in the living room of his Tribeca penthouse. It was a wreck. Half-packed cardboard boxes were everywhere. The expensive art, the Basquiats, the Warhols had already been seized by the creditors. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows was grey and dreary. The rain hadn't stopped since the night Nina left. The elevator doors opened directly into the apartment, and Jessica Thorne stormed in. She was dragging 2 large Louis Vuitton suitcases. She wasn't wearing the red dress anymore. She was wearing jeans and a leather jacket, and she looked furious. Jessica, Maris said, standing up from the couch where he had been nursing a lukewarm scotch. Thank God you're here. It's a nightmare. The lawyers are saying I might face jail time if I don't come up with a $50 million bond by Friday. You need to talk to your contacts, see if we can get a bridge loan. Jessica stopped and stared at him, as if he had grown a second head. She let go of her suitcases and laughed a sharp, bitter sound. We, Jessica sneered. There is no we, Maris. Are you insane? You're radioactive. But, baby, we're a team. You said I was the visionary. I said that when your credit card worked, Jessica snapped. She walked over to the mantelpiece and grabbed a small jade statue he had bought her in Tokyo. She shoved it into her purse. I'm an attorney, Maris. I know a sinking ship when I see one. You're not just broke, you're about to be indicted. I'm not going down as the fraudster's girlfriend. You can't leave me, Maris yelled, panic finally setting in. I left Nina for you, and that, Jessica said, grabbing the handles of her luggage, was the stupidest business decision you ever made. You traded a diamond mine for a cubic zirconia. That woman owned you, and you didn't even know it. It's pathetic. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button. By the way, the paparazzi are swarming the lobby. I told them you're upstairs crying. Good luck with the eviction. The doors closed, and she was gone. Maris was alone in the echoing, empty penthouse that wasn't his anymore. His phone was buzzing relentlessly on the coffee table. He ignored it. He knew who it was. Banks, lawyers, reporters. He picked up the remote and turned on the massive 85-inch television that was mounted on the wall. He just wanted noise to drown out the silence of his failure. It was tuned to CNBC. The anchor, a severe-looking woman with blonde hair, was speaking excitedly. The biggest financial shock of the decade, the anchor was saying. The mysterious Zurich-based private equity firm, the Vanguard Group, has finally stepped out of the shadows, following the death of its founder, Lord Vance. Today, in a press conference in Geneva, they introduced their new chairwoman. Maris froze. He stepped closer to the television. The screen changed to a live feed from a sleek, ultra-modern press room in Switzerland. Camera flashes were going off like strobe lights. Standing at the podium, flanked by the Swiss flag and the Vanguard lion emblem, was Nina. She looked stunning. Powerful. She wore a tailored navy suit that radiated authority. Her gaze into the camera was direct and unwavering. There was no trace of the quiet, submissive housewife who used to bring Maris his coffee. This was a titan of industry. The graphic beneath her name on the screen read Nina Vance, Chairwoman, the Vanguard Group. Estimated family net worth, 85 billion. Maris felt his knees give out. He fell back onto the couch. 85 billion. The reporter on the TV continued over the footage. In a surprising turn of events, Ms. Vance also announced that Vanguard has fully acquired the assets of the now-defunct Sterling Dynamics in New York. She stated that the company will be rebranded and the Ether technology which she personally developed will be utilized for global humanitarian infrastructure projects. She had taken his company back, and she was giving it away to charity. It was the ultimate flex, the ultimate insult. On the screen, a journalist shouted a question at Nina. Ms. Vance, Ms. Vance. Your ex-husband, Maris Sterling, is facing fraud charges in New York today. Do you have any comment on his situation? Nina paused. A faint, knowing smile touched her lips. It was the only crack in her professional armor. Mr. Sterling wanted total independence, Nina said calmly into the microphone. I'm happy that I was able to help him achieve that goal. I wish him the best of luck in his endeavors." She turned and walked away from the podium. Maris stared at the screen until it cut back to the studio anchor. He looked around the empty room. He had gotten exactly what he asked for in that courtroom. He was free of her. He was independent. And he was utterly destroyed. A loud, heavy knock echoed from the front door of the penthouse. "Federal agents!" a voice boomed from the hallway. "Maris Sterling, open up. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding securities fraud." Maris closed his eyes. He thought about the apartment in Queens, the one with the view of the brick wall. It sounded like paradise right now. The heavy oak door of the penthouse didn't just open. It vibrated off its hinges. "Federal agents, open the door." The shout was guttural, terrifying, and loud enough to shake the dust off the empty shelves. Maris stood frozen in the center of the living room. The silence that had filled the apartment for the last 3 days was instantly shattered by the mechanical thud of a battering ram hitting the lock. He looked around wildly. The half-packed boxes, the bare walls where the Basquiats used to hang, the floor-to-ceiling windows, streaming with relentless grey rain. For a split second, the flight instinct kicked in. He looked at the fire escape. Slippery metal 4 stories down to an alleyway filled with dumpsters. He looked at the elevator. Locked. He realized with a jolt of nausea that his passport was in the wall safe. The safe that was digital. The safe that ran on a security protocol he had claimed to invent, but which was actually controlled by the central server at Vance Holdings. He couldn't even retrieve his own identity. He was trapped in a sword he had built, locked by the woman he had discarded. Crack! The door splintered inward. 6 agents in navy blue windbreakers, with FBI emblazoned in yellow on their backs, swarmed the room. They moved with the synchronized predatory efficiency of a wolf pack. "Maris Sterling," the lead agent barked. He was a man with a buzz cut and eyes devoid of any sympathy, eyes that had seen 1,000 rich men crumble. "Show me your hands now." I'm him." Maris stammered, his voice cracking. He raised his hands. The motion felt surreal.